Erickson here, the Erick Erickson Show. The phone number is 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. My holy cow, the DOJ has just filed a lawsuit or intends to file a lawsuit against Georgia. It's not what you're thinking. I want to explain, but first, here's Merrick Garland, the Attorney General.
The rights of all eligible citizens to vote are the central pillars of our democracy. They are the rights from which all other rights ultimately flow. 2 weeks ago, I spoke about our country's history of expanding the right to vote. I noted that our progress on protecting voting rights, especially for Black Americans and people of color, has never been steady. Moments of voting rights expansion have often been met with counter efforts to curb the franchise. Among other things, I expressed concern about the dramatic rise in state legislative actions that will make it harder for millions of citizens to cast a vote that counts. I explained that the Justice Department is rededicating its resources to enforcing federal law and to protecting the franchise for all eligible voters. And I promised that we are scrutinizing new laws that seek to curb voter access, and that where we see violations of federal law, we will act. In keeping that promise, today the Department of Justice is suing the state of Georgia. Our complaint alleges that recent changes to Georgia's election laws were enacted with the purpose of denying or abridging the right of Black Georgians to vote on account of their race or color in violation of Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act.
That's Merrick Garland. Now, here's the thing. There's a lot of Supreme Court precedent out there that if you are taking actions and they're against Democrats, not Black voters, it's perfectly constitutional, and it wouldn't be if it's against Black voters. So what the DOJ has to argue here is that this is explicitly about targeting Black voters. The Republicans will argue it's about Democrats and protecting democracy. The Biden administration is filing this lawsuit against Georgia not because it thinks it's going to win, but because it's got to do something. What you're going to be hearing in the spin from Democrats is the justifiable outrage about this. But I want to give you the lay of the land of what's happening here. And this goes back to H.R. 1 dying in the Senate the other day. H.R. 1 was the Democrats' messaging bill on election reform, the For the People Act, and Democrats around the country decided that it was a must-pass to save democracy. You had to pass this legislation if you were going to save democracy, and it died in the Senate. Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema would not get rid of the filibuster, so it is dead. Behind the scenes, there is some seething anger among partisan progressives that the Biden administration did not go to the mats for H.R. 1. Now, the Biden administration's position has always been this is a messaging bill. It's not going to pass. We're not going to burn political capital on it. But progressive activists internalized that it was necessary. I mean, you had people on CNN and MSNBC, anchors, not just talking heads, but the anchors saying that this is to preserve democracy. And so progressives believed it. So why isn't Joe Biden standing up for democracy? Because it was never meant to pass. They never even had the votes. I mean, everybody's focusing on Sinema and Manchin. What they're not focusing on is there are probably 6 other Democrats who didn't want to support it, and they knew they could keep their mouths shut knowing the filibuster wasn't going to go away. They could publicly say, I'm supporting it, even though they wouldn't. The Biden administration had no business spending political capital on H.R. 1 when it was never designed to pass, but progressive activists insisted it had to pass. So the Biden administration has to do something to placate those progressive activists. What they've done is filed a lawsuit against the state of Georgia over its legislation, but they've screwed it up in terms of timing. You've got to understand the problem with the timing. Last week, Joe Manchin, the senator from West Virginia, proposed a compromise plan. Joe Manchin's compromise plan is to embrace the Georgia voting law. He's embraced from the Georgia voting law photo ID for absentee and in-person voting, something Stacey Abrams had said was a tool of voter suppression. He's endorsed cleaning the voter rolls in the way Georgia does it, the so-called voter purges that Stacey Abrams said suppresses the vote. He's endorsed Georgia's 19-day early voting period, which Stacey Abrams said isn't enough. And he's endorsed Georgia's absentee ballot voting plan, which Stacey Abrams says is bad. And what happened? Stacey Abrams, after Joe Manchin came out with the compromise plan that included voter purges, voter ID, early voting, and absentee balloting modeled on Georgia, Stacey Abrams came out and said, yeah, this is a good plan. If it applies nationwide, it's a great compromise. Let's do voter purges. Let's do photo ID. All the stuff she said were bad in Georgia, she's now embraced. And only then does DOJ come out and sue Georgia. You almost get the suspicion that they're trying to step on Stacey Abrams here, maybe to benefit Raphael Warnock in 2022 in Georgia, so Abrams doesn't overshadow him. But the timing is peculiar because Abrams just agreed to all of the stuff that DOJ now says is bad and is going to sue about. Abrams the other day agreed to all of it because Manchin proposed it. And by the way, it's still not going to pass the Senate. The ramifications here are actually kind of staggering politically. Stacey Abrams is going to be sidelined now because the Department of Justice, their lawsuit will predominate. Remember, Abrams has already filed a lawsuit. Stacey Abrams is already suing about the law. It hasn't got a lot of attention. Now the Department of Justice is intervening. They're going to file a lawsuit, and Abrams' suit is going to be overshadowed by the Department of Justice lawsuit. Additionally, here's something you need to understand about the Department of Justice. They're very conservative in their legal approach. The reason they've become very conservative in their legal approach is because of Bob McDonnell. Bob McDonnell was the Virginia governor. He was a Republican. He was indicted and prosecuted and found guilty. The DOJ prosecuted him over corruption, and his case was thrown out by the United States Supreme Court. And thereafter, several other major DOJ cases were thrown out. They overplayed their hand, and they've gotten very conservative since in their legal strategy and how they advance cases. So Abrams and other progressive groups have filed a bunch of lawsuits against this Georgia law already, making massive claims about the lawsuit. The Department of Justice's legal strategy has gotten so conservative, they're not going to make a lot of the same complaints, which is going to impact the fundraising for these progressive groups. Why isn't the DOJ saying this? If this is true, why isn't the DOJ claiming it? That's going to be the logical question. I mean, if Abrams is saying all of these crazy things about Georgia's law and the Department of Justice does not reflect those things in their own lawsuit, it's going to make Abrams look a little bit overdramatic. This really helps Brian Kemp. Brian Kemp is the governor of Georgia, and Chris Carr is the attorney general in Georgia. Brian Kemp and Chris Carr are up for re-election in 2022. Donald Trump has been targeting Brian Kemp explicitly and Chris Carr implicitly. He explicitly wants to find someone to run against Brian Kemp. They think maybe they found a candidate. We'll get into that here later. Brian Kemp now gets to battle Joe Biden in court to defend the election law that Donald Trump praised. Donald Trump is implicitly trying to find someone to run against Chris Carr. He's not openly antagonizing Chris Carr, but he also believes that Chris Carr did not do enough to defend him. And there are Trump activists in Georgia who have been trying to find someone to challenge Chris Carr. Now Chris Carr and Brian Kemp last week took on woke culture and critical race theory. This week get to be sued by Joe Biden and fight in court. Several political operatives I've talked to this morning said this is like Christmas in June for Brian Kemp. One of them said that Joe Biden, had he wrapped this up and stuck it under the tree, couldn't have given Brian Kemp a better present. I mean, a lot of Christmas analogies floating out there among the GOP today. This helps Brian Kemp. Brian Kemp gets to go to Trump voters and say, hey, Joe Biden, he's not suing Donald Trump, he's suing me and Georgia, and I'm fighting them for that law that you people wanted. I am fighting for you. I'm preserving this law. Good luck, Vernon Jones. I mean, Vernon Jones is the Island of Misfit Toys candidate against Brian Kemp. It's amazing to watch the Trump supporters. They couldn't find a credible candidate yet, so they rushed to Vernon Jones, who's not a credible candidate. And Vernon Jones every day comes out, so when I'm governor of Georgia, I'm going to sign an executive order banning critical race theory. Brian Kemp already did that. The other day, he said something else. When he's governor of Georgia, he's going to do something. I forget what it was, but it's something Brian Kemp had already done. Vernon Jones cannot say Joe Biden is suing me and I'm defending Georgia. He can't say that. Brian Kemp can. This gives Brian Kemp a major present from the Biden administration, and it totally undermines Stacey Abrams. The DOJ case will overshadow Abrams, and they waited until after Abrams embraced photo ID and voter purges. And now, here comes the Department of Justice. This is somewhat ironic, then hilarious. The Department of Justice rushes out and says, oh, voter purges and photo ID for absentee ballot, they're bad. Nuh-uh, Stacey Abrams just said they're not racist. And now you're saying they're designed to suppress black people. Stacey Abrams the other day said, no, they are not designed to suppress the black vote. After Joe Manchin proposed, yes, Stacey Abrams last year said they were, but when Joe Manchin proposed the same damn thing last week, Stacey Abrams said, no, they're not racist at all. We're totally fine with photo ID. It's going to be very, very hard for the Democrats to thread this. Meanwhile, Brian Kemp and Chris Carr get to be waving big flags and say, woohoo, Joe Biden's suing me, vote for me. I mean, all you've got to do if you're Brian Kemp now, Donald Trump can come to Georgia, barnstorm the state, and say, don't vote for Brian Kemp. And all Brian Kemp has to say is, Joe Biden's suing me, not him, and I'm fighting for you. And guess what's going to happen? This is a very big present for Brian Kemp, and it totally cuts the legs out from under Stacey Abrams' arguments, particularly her flip-flop in the past week, and it deprives her of a fundraising tool. Why would you give money to Stacey Abrams' group that's suing Georgia when you're already paying taxes to the federal government and they're suing Georgia with a more reasonable and plausible case? The timing on this could not have been worse for Stacey Abrams, and it could not have been better for Brian Kemp, because it comes right as the Trump team thinks they found someone more credible than Vernon Jones to run against him. And now the wind is going to be out of their sails as Brian Kemp gets to barnstorm the state and tell everybody, Joe Biden's suing us and I'm fighting him and Chris Carr's fighting him. My goodness gracious. But you got to keep the bottom line here in mind. What is this really about? It's not about winning the case. It's never been about winning the case. Part of it is about stalling the case until after the 2022 election. They want to drag it out so it can't be implemented in 2022. The other thing that's going on here, though, is the whole reason for the lawsuit is not because of the merits of the lawsuit. It's because Joe Biden pissed off the progressive base by not supporting H.R. 1. And now he's got to get the attorney general out there and do damage control for him and say, hey, we're going to sue Georgia with that law you all hate. When the New York Times just last week did a story and said, actually, we kind of overblew the case on Georgia. It's actually a pretty reasonable bill. So they wait until all of the major media outlets and Stacey Abrams come out and concede that Georgia's law really isn't as bad as they claimed, and now they're going to file a lawsuit. Had H.R. 1 passed, they would have never done it. But more importantly, had Joe Biden thrown any political capital behind H.R. 1, they would have never filed the lawsuit. Because H.R. 1 did not pass, and Joe Biden refused to even talk up the legislation and spend political capital trying to get it passed, they've got to file a foolhardy lawsuit that undermines Stacey Abrams in Georgia and helps Brian Kemp in Georgia because they pissed off the progressive base nationally. And now they got to say, look, we're fighting for you in federal court in a state where Donald Trump appointed all the judges. Good luck with that.
I really do like his opinion on
1 minute,
Erick
Phil.
Erickson.
It is an Open Line Friday. Now that we got the breaking news out of the way, I'm happy to take your phone calls. The phone number is 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. I've gotten a number of emails from listeners asking if I think this case will, what will the Supreme Court do? It is way, way too early to determine what the Supreme Court will do. I mean, that could be a couple of years away, and that is kind of the point here. The Biden administration isn't really interested in stopping the law. They're interested in postponing implementation of the law, dragging it out as long as possible. Their claims are going to be hard to make because the Supreme Court has in the last decade made it very, very clear if a political party or a government makes a decision that hurts black voters, but the intention is not to hurt black voters, it's to stop Democrats, that's actually permissible. Now you're saying, I shouldn't be able to do it. But listen, there is a difference between black voters and Democrats. And if a Republican legislature passes a law that is nominally constitutional and it's designed to make it harder for Democrats to vote and everyone else to vote, they got a hard problem. And the reason here is this, because the law doesn't target Democrats and it doesn't target black voters. It targets everyone. And if everyone is subject to the same burdens of the law, then it's really hard to say they're targeting black voters. You can say, well, it'll have a disparate impact on black voters. But that's not really the case. The Republicans say, well, it may have a disparate impact on Democrats. It doesn't have a disparate impact on black voters. You got to understand that nuance there because it is very important in a federal court case on election law. It is very, very important. This is the area of law I used to practice. I actually, this is in my wheelhouse. If Democrats can scream about disparate racial impact all they want, but Republicans can say this impacts everyone the same way, and those local counties, this is something the national Democrats forget. In Georgia, the counties are controlled by parties. And Fulton County, which is Atlanta, DeKalb County, which is the outside of Atlanta on the east side, Clayton County, which is on the south side of Atlanta, Cobb County, which is the northwest side of Atlanta, Gwinnett County, which is the northeast side of Atlanta, Douglas County, which is the west side of Atlanta, they're increasingly controlled by Democrats. Yes, they're increasingly controlled by Democrats because ethnically and racially, they're less white than they were. And non-white voters do disproportionately tend to vote for Democrats. But it's not black people in charge, it's Democrats in charge. And so the Republicans have a very solid case saying, hey, this isn't about black voters. Everybody gets impacted. And if they're impacted the most, it's because the Democrats control those counties, not us. We're not in charge of the local election. It's going to be a very, very hard case for the DOJ to make. And on top of that, you've got virtually every major judge now in Georgia on the federal bench is a Trump appointee, and the 11th Circuit is now controlled. The Trump administration was able to flip the 11th Circuit to majority conservative. It's going to be very difficult for the DOJ. And I suspect, again, the DOJ knows that they're not going to win the case, but they know that they can delay the implementation of the law until after the 2022 election, and maybe that helps Raphael Warnock. Maybe. I suspect it's going to blow up in their face, though. It's going to energize Republicans, particularly at a time that Republicans in Georgia were divided because of Brian Kemp and Donald Trump's antagonism towards Brian Kemp. And suddenly, just like, remember, right after the law was passed, a whole lot of Republicans who were pissed off at Brian Kemp suddenly came back home. And they're like, you know what? This guy's a fighter. We'll stick with him. And then some of that love went away again, and now it's coming right back. Why? Because the Biden administration has just helped Brian Kemp get reelected. It's really undermined Stacey. I cannot believe she came out the other day and embraced voter ID and voter purges, things that since 2018 she has said led to voter suppression, and now she endorses them. And once she endorses them, the DOJ comes out and says, we're going to file a lawsuit over these very things Stacey Abrams just said are perfectly okay. That's just these people. What the real moral of the story here, the real lesson here, is how the Democrats are not talking to each other. The Democrats are very clearly as disjointed and fractured internally as the Republicans, but they've got much better public message discipline than the Republicans.
15.
And so no one has really paid attention to it. This highlights just how divided they are, that they waited
10.
for Abrams to do that before they did this. It totally undercuts her. back. It is Erick Erickson. Delighted to have you with me this Friday. It's Open Line Friday, and the number is 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. Very quickly, if you're just tuning in and you missed the news, it is actually big breaking news at this hour. The Department of Justice, the Biden administration, is suing the state of Georgia over its election package. This is a political issue. There isn't a ton of merit in it. You don't have to believe me. Actually, there's you will find this out. If you missed what I said at the beginning of the show, I have helpfully put it together for you so that you can share it with your friends. If you text the word data to 877-973-7425, that's the show number, 877-973-7425. Text the word data. I'll send you back a link to the opening monologue and my written out thoughts on this lawsuit and why it really undercuts Stacey Abrams and dramatically helps Brian Kemp. I am happy to take your phone calls on it as well at 877-973-7425. I'm going to go to the phones right now. I'm going to go to Stephen. Stephen, welcome to the Erick Erickson Show.
Morning, Eric. How you doing today?
Great.
Good. Hey, I just had one question. It's not about the voting rights, but the congressional seats that were added and subtracted from due to the census, when do those actually take effect?
Those take effect this coming year. In fact, the Georgia legislature, where I am, is going to have to convene in October to redraw the lines. Now, 15 states have actually just filed a lawsuit against the Department of Commerce, which is the department in which the Census Bureau is housed, demanding that they go on and release the data. The Biden administration has suddenly slow-walked release of the information. And you got to pay attention to this because this isn't getting a lot of attention out there. Do you remember before the election, the Democrats were claiming that Donald Trump was going to steal the election by slowing down the mail so people's absentee ballots didn't get back in time? This was a big thing. And the postmaster general and the post office said, no, actually, we've got a real reason we're going to slow down the mail. It has nothing to do with absentee ballots. It's not even going to be implemented until after that. And the media didn't care. I mean, they made such a big deal out of it. The postmaster general actually had to come out and reassure Congress that the plan, if it was implemented, would absolutely not be implemented until after the election. And even then, the Democrats and members of the media actually peddle the conspiracy theory Donald Trump was trying to slow down the mail to win the election. Guess what? The Postmaster General, they're still slowing down the mail. Big story in the New York Times yesterday, they're slowing down the mail. Now, while all of this was going on, the Democrats were alleging that Donald Trump was also slowing down the census to hurt the Democrats. And the Census Bureau came out and said, no, this isn't really true. We've got a COVID global pandemic. The data has been slower. We're short-staffed, and it didn't matter. The Democrats were pushing hard the conspiracy theory that the Trump administration was slowing the data. Now, guess what? It's the Biden administration slowing the data. And it is 15 governors suing now Washington, D.C., the Chamber of Commerce, or not the Chamber of Commerce, the Department of Commerce, because the Biden administration has slowed down delivering the census data slower than what they originally claimed they would. Now they're saying they're going to have to give it in an old format if they give it at all. And states under the Constitution are required to draw their lines. There are some states that have primaries early in the year, and these states are upset that the Biden administration, by slow walking the data now, is going to undermine their primaries and harm their candidates and their politicians and their states by their failure to be able to timely redraw districts in which people can campaign. You got to set up ballots. You got to rearrange people in precincts. There's a lot of work that goes into redistricting and moving people from district to district. And it's the Biden administration, not the Trump administration, that is dragging their feet. Now that it looks like the Democrats, with a 5-seat House majority, could possibly lose it, the Biden administration's trying to stop states from being able to redistrict. Now, they can't. It's unconstitutional, and a court is going to probably have to issue an injunction and force them to go on and release the data now. In fact, one court already told them to release the data on a deadline, and the Biden administration, they're getting close to the deadline. They still don't seem to want to release the data, and so folks are having to go back to court. Notice how it was a grand conspiracy the media would pay attention to when it was Donald Trump in charge. Joe Biden is literally doing the exact same thing on both the mail front and the redistricting front. You don't hear a peep from the media about either one. By the way, it will cause problems for states across the board if they don't hurry up and release the data, because states do have to redraw those districts. Georgia's elections primaries are in May, I think, and they think as long as they get the data and are able to start drawing by October, they'll be fine. But some states have primaries in February, April, and March, and they're starting to get a little nervous. Understandably so, given the work that's got to go into it. And of course, now that it's Joe Biden in charge, many members of the media who are crying foul over Donald Trump are perfectly willing to give Joe Biden a pass on slow walking the census data, hoping that maybe it'll help the Democrats hold on to the House of Representatives. This is why people are people, to do all sorts of problems. All right, let's go back to the phones. 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. And listen, as I go to the phones here, I got to remind you guys, and I know Charlie's telling you if you call in, we've got a delay in the phone system, and so please get to the point as quick as you can so that I can get to you and get your phone call. I want to go to Donald right now. Welcome to the program, Donald. Hope you're having a great day.
I hope you are too, Eric, and thank you for taking my call. My question, two questions quickly. You keep mentioning Donald Trump 2024, possible running again for re-election. My question is, the state of New York, as you know, Cy Vance and the Attorney General up there are looking to indict him on possible criminal charges for things that he did up there. And also here in Georgia, the Fulton County DA, I think her last name is Willis, has impaneled a grand jury to see if there's anything they can go after Donald Trump for, as in regards to interfering in the election. And my question on the Fulton County DA is, how is it she chose to take what should be a state investigation and make it her own, seeing as she's only for Fulton County?
Oh, that's a great question. And so let me set the background and parameters here. Donald, thanks very much for the phone call on that. The parameters here are that Brad Raffensperger, the Secretary of State, had a phone call with Donald Trump, purportedly in which Donald Trump tried to pressure Brad Raffensperger to throw out the election or make enough changes for Donald Trump to have won. Raffensperger refused. Now, why is the state not prosecuting? Because if there was a crime, it happened in Fulton County. And under state law, a crime is prosecuted in the county in which it originates, and it is the district attorney of that county. It is not the attorney general of the state who handles the criminal prosecution. Now, there are special circumstances by which the state itself can prosecute, but these sorts of purported crimes are not them. Gang violence and a few other crimes, the state now has some authority under state law to prosecute, but by and large, crimes are overwhelmingly prosecuted by a district attorney in a particular county where the crime purportedly happened. In this case, Donald Trump called Brad Raffensperger, who was in Fulton County. Therefore, it is the Fulton County district attorney who must do it unless they work some deal with the state where the state does it. Now, there's no way that she wants to surrender this over to the Republicans. She wants to be a hero, and it's the local district attorney who would have to agree to surrender it. It's not the state that can come in and take the case. It's the local district attorney who would have to surrender it. She doesn't want to hand it over to Chris Carr, the attorney general, because he would dismiss it. So she wants to hold on to it. That's what you got to remember here. Again, the general rule in the state of Georgia is that a crime is prosecuted in the county in which it took place by the district attorney of that county. In this case, they purport Donald Trump broke the law in Fulton County on a phone call. Therefore, it's the district attorney of Fulton County who gets the first take on trying to prosecute it if they do at all. Now, back to the phones. Let's go to Carol. Welcome to the program, Carol.
Thank you very much. I'm a first-time caller. I am calling because I'm very concerned about the voter ID identification. Everyone seems to be upset about that, but I just went to make a deposit at the Delta Community Credit Union. I don't know if I can say their name. My husband and I have been customers of theirs since 1986. We have substantial deposits, 2 mortgages. I go in to deposit a check for $45. They refused for me to make this deposit because they said that my identification had expired. And could I get it? I said, my driver's license are in the car. So I left, went to the ATM machine, made that deposit, and then I went and got my license, and I went in and I said, I don't understand why I could not make a deposit. I was a banker for 34 years, and I simply do not understand this. And she says, well, that is the rule. So the rule is you must have a valid driver's license. So I guess for the last year and a half, it hasn't mattered. But all of a sudden, it matters today.
So I actually have the information on this one because I ran into the same thing at FedEx a couple of weeks ago. And a lot of people were saying, oh, this is Federal Express. They just want to see your ID. It's not really the government. Actually, it is a new rule from the federal government for interstate wire transfers and shipments now. The bank or the shipping company has to confirm your ID. They're still waiting on the rules, and the default for most companies now is that you've got to show your ID. The rule only went into effect, I want to say, in January or February. So if you go into a FedEx or UPS store now, you'll see signs that we have to check your ID before you ship, and it's actually not them, it's the federal government requiring it. So there is a bit of irony then that the federal government, which requires you to show your ID to ship a package or deposit a check in a bank, doesn't think you should have to show your ID to vote. That being said, it is the black voters in America who overwhelmingly support photo ID. This is something that the left doesn't seem to understand. The progressive white left doesn't seem to understand. There's a level of paternalism I talked about the other day with them. The people most opposed to photo ID in this country are white secular progressives. And the reason they're opposed is because they think it suppresses the black vote. Black voters are actually totally fine with having photo ID. Black voters think it's perfectly okay. In fact, black voters, if you talk to them, get a little bit of resentment that the rich white dudes on the left think, oh, poor black people can't get a driver's license. Really? There's a lot of racism. This is probably why rich white progressives are so into white fragility and anti-racism nonsense, because they know deep down they're the racists. I mean, you got these white people. I read some story the other day about the CEO of American Airlines was on a flight reading Robin DiAngelo's White Fragility. Robin DiAngelo is a huckster on the left, making a lot of money as a white person, lecturing white people about their race. And the American Airlines CEO is clearly an idiot for having read the book and was confronted by a black stewardess about what he thought about the book, and they turned it into a BR stunt. And American Airlines has gone super woke as a result. The book is dreadful. In fact, if you talk in rooms privately with a lot of progressives, they're appalled that Robin DiAngelo's book has taken off like it has. And it has taken off with a bunch of rich people who want to feel like they're connected to the black community, rich white people connected to the black community, and seething with self-guilt and self-doubt about their internal racism. And these are the people who think black people are too dumb to be able to get a photo ID. Black people are perfectly happy to get a photo ID. In fact, in polling that came out the other day, something like 70% of black voters in this country support photo ID to vote. Only 51% of white progressives think it's a good idea. Overwhelmingly white progressives, majority of them, you should note, support it, but something like 48% of them don't want it because they think it hurts black people. And black people are like, no, dude, we get driver's licenses just like you white people. It's fascinating to see the racism of rich white secular progressives in this country. Meanwhile, they're blaming Trump voters for all the racism in the country.
Well connected and well respected.
couple of people said they tried to text data to the show number and it did work. I just tried it. I'm not sure what's going on, but the backup is text the word data to 33777. I just tried that and it certainly works. And you will get the DOJ Georgia lawsuit synopsis of what they're actually doing and why it's terrible politics. It really is objectively bad politics for the Democrats. It undercuts Stacey Abrams. It helps Brian Kemp. It doesn't really do a lot for Raphael Warnock. It undercuts Democrat fundraising efforts when they try to file their partisan lawsuits. It's terrible politics for the Democrats, but it's necessary. Joe Biden genuinely has to do it because he alienated progressives by not fighting for the For the People Act, which is now well and truly dead. The result, of course, is that, something's got to give. And that something is the Biden administration filing a lawsuit to show message. Remember, now I don't really even remember this because I was such a kid when George H.W. Bush was president. But there was a time in 1992, he was running against Bill Clinton to try to signal to him that you need to sound empathetic when you give the speech. And he said, message, I care. He read it from the teleprompter, as sometimes you do. And this is kind of Joe Biden, message, I care. He did not support the H.R. 1 Act. He did not campaign for it. He did not throw the White House's lobbying effort behind it. He didn't barnstorm states pushing Manchin and Sinema. In fact, he attacked him from the campaign trail and undercut his cause. Progressives are furious because they internalize that this bill is all that stands between us and the collapse of democracy, and now it hasn't passed. So Biden has to trot out Merrick Garland to sue Georgia to show them that, actually, we really do care about Georgia. That's what everything is about. It's kind of funny to see that delay now. All right, we got so much more that we've got to tackle when we come back, including, I never even got into infrastructure. This is breaking news. I also want to take your phone calls, 877-973-7425. We got to get into the election audit in Georgia, though. I promised the local news folks at WSB in Atlanta, I told the news team, this is the story I'm talking about, so I will talk about it. I know. There are a lot of people around the nation who have heard that evidence has come forward now in an audit of Fulton County, Georgia, that shows the election was stolen. Problem. It's not actually true. In fact, the judge is preparing to dismiss the case. And the plaintiffs are admitting the data they have doesn't actually show what people say. In fact, I bring this up specifically because the story's in the news today. And so the reason I bring it up is because someone sent me an Instagram message and said, is this true? And it was a screenshot of some data. And what the data showed was that there had been enough proof shown in the Fulton County audit of absentee ballots that Donald Trump actually did win the state of Georgia and David Perdue actually did win. I was like, well, I haven't heard this anywhere. This is very interesting. And so I started digging around and I couldn't find it. It came from some website out there, some pro-Trump website. And then there's a story today in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution that not only is the case about to be thrown out, but the plaintiffs concede that the absentee ballot data they have right now isn't good enough to be able to detect fraud. I want to talk about that when we come back. Remember, you can text data to 33777 and get 15. The explanation for why the DOJ is filing this lawsuit and why it probably helps Brian Kemp and hurts Stacey Abrams in the process. It is Erick Erickson here. Absolutely delighted to have you with me. Truly, I am. You should always tune in. You know, you can go to ewerickson.com. You can find me on social media at ewerickson. Importantly, in the first hour, if you weren't here, if you weren't listening, the Department of Justice is suing the state of Georgia over its election bill. I explained it in the first hour. I was diligent. Normally, someone is here to record it and send it out, and he's in Colorado with the family fly fishing. So I did it myself. And if you want to review it, I even wrote about it. You can read what I wrote. You can listen to the opening monologue by texting data to 33777, where I break it down for you. A buddy of mine just texted me up in Rome. I still got to get up there and have bourbon and cigars with him. And he says, is Abrams even going to run in 2022? And yeah, I think her ego will require her to do it. I mean, the left has been anticipating the Brian Kemp-Stacey Abrams rematch for a while, and they're going to have to go through with it, whether it's a wise idea for her or not. I absolutely think she's got to do that. And Emery, I promise I'm getting up to Rome at some point soon for bourbon and cigars. Whether bring Philip or not, I'm not sure. All right. The phone number, 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. This is important. A judge has thrown out most of the case alleging counterfeit ballots in Fulton County, Georgia. This is a nationally important story because it comes on the heels of the Arizona audit, which is ongoing. The Michigan Republican Party and the Michigan State Senate Republicans have authored a report examining what happened in Georgia, Michigan, and Arizona and concluded nothing went wrong. There was no theft. The Michigan Republicans in particular looked at the Fulton County situation and said there's no there, and it came before this report, before this story now, that it was dropped, but a lot of people believe otherwise, and I need to spend some time with you on this. This is from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. A judge dismissed most of a lawsuit on Thursday seeking a deep inspection of Fulton County absentee ballots after last year's presidential election, a review pursued by voters trying to find fraud. Superior Court Judge Brian Amero's ruling jeopardizes the prospects for a ballot inspection to continue, though a plaintiff in the lawsuit said he believes it will soon move forward. The case is an attempt to scrutinize 147,000 absentee ballots based on claims by Republicans who suspected there were counterfeit ballots during a manual recount of November's election results. Election officials have said there's no indication of fraud after multiple recounts and investigations. An attorney for the Fulton Elections Board said the ruling prevents the possibility for an in-person review of absentee ballots using high-powered microscopes in the Georgia World Congress Center as sought by those who believe fraud produced Democrat Joe Biden's 12,000-vote win in Georgia over Republican Donald Trump. The litigation is finished, said Don Samuel, a prominent Atlanta attorney hired by the Fulton Elections Board. Is there going to be an audit? Not right now. There's no discovery permitted. There's no lawsuit pending anymore. Amero dismissed most claims, this is the judge, against the county elections board, the county clerk, and the county itself, deciding they couldn't be sued under Georgia's sovereign immunity laws, which limit where plaintiffs can turn to the courts for relief. The judge left in place a previous order requiring the county to produce digital images of absentee ballots and other elections records that are public documents under the Georgia Open Records Act. The lead plaintiff in the case said he viewed Amero's victory order as a victory. The plaintiff plans to submit a ballot inspection plan next week based on the judge's order in May to unseal absentee ballots, allowing for high-resolution rescans of ballots and in-person discovery. We just want Fulton to be responsible. We're going to move forward any time now unless they try to stall again. Fulton may make new desperation move to postpone it. But the other lawyer said that when the case is over, the prior order to unseal the ballots becomes moot. Yeah, I'm not sure how it works. If the judge dismisses everything, you're not going to be able to go in and inspect those ballots. But here's the thing. This is a bottom line important admission. Without a court-ordered ballot review, the plaintiffs would be left with computerized absentee ballot images that they were already provided, and they say, the plaintiff says those images aren't clear enough to detect irregularities. That's the plaintiff in the case. Now, I bring this up very importantly. I have worked for a number of people in my life, and I have 3 bosses in my life who I consider 3 of the very best people I have ever in my life worked for. And I've worked for a lot of people in my life, but 3 of them I just consider to be the best 3 people I have ever worked for. One of them is actually my current boss, and this isn't blow smoke. Drew Anderson here at WSB, where I'm broadcasting from, is just a phenomenal human being. I have so much fun hanging out with him and working and talking through things. He's just great. And his predecessor, Pete Spriggs. He's the guy who got me into radio and was my boss for my first 10 years in radio, and is just a phenomenal human being and was just so fun to work with. And the third guy is named Joe Guerrero, and Joe was my boss at Eagle Publishing when that company bought Red State back in 2006. I went through a series of bosses. Probably, let's see, first guy, second guy, third. Joe, I think, was the third of 4. No, he was the 4th of 5. It was a very odd company, but Joe was hired, and the guy was just amazing. He was such a great guy, wicked smart, lives in Colorado now. And I actually miss him, and I haven't seen him in a while. And he subscribes to my daily Substack email. Joe was great because I was a somewhat problematic soul in that I knew the company could not fire me. I mean, the company would not exist if they fired me. Rarely are you in a situation where you're the indispensable person and really know it. And I was very much the indispensable person. If they fired me at the time, Red State would have up and died overnight. It really, truly would have at the time. And I worked very hard to make sure it could continue. It does. I'm very proud of the site. It has grown over time. It's grown. Actually, the traffic's way better now than it was. It's not as influential as it had been, but it's definitely more traffic now. And I'm very proud of them to be able to keep the lights on and keep it going. But there was a time where if I quit or was fired, the site would have died. And so I knew I could pretty much get away with anything. And Joe, my boss, his real job was just to run interference between me and the CEO, who sometimes disagreed with me on stuff. And I could pretty much do whatever I wanted. And I knew it. And I also did pretty much whatever I wanted. I think much credit deserved for standing up and doing what I wanted, but that's neither here nor there. Joe was awesome. And I say all of that to say that Joe left a comment the other day talking about the voter fraud in Georgia that seems very clear that Biden didn't win Georgia. I had no idea what he was talking about. Now, I'm in Georgia. For those of you listening who aren't in Georgia, I'm in Georgia. Not only am I in Georgia, I was an elections lawyer in Georgia. I know how this stuff is done, in part because I helped write the law on voting in Georgia. When I was a law school student, I interned for the Secretary of State during the transitioning to electronic ballots and helped write a lot of the law. I argued as a litigator. I argued a number of election law cases. I actually did a charity event last night was saying how much I hated being a lawyer, but I was a very good transactional lawyer, and I was a really good elections lawyer. I defended a lot of cases, and I also challenged cases. And I hear Joe's comment about what happened in Georgia, and I had no idea what he was talking about. And then last night, someone sent me a screenshot of a website talking about how enough votes had been discovered in Georgia that seriously cast doubt on the fact that Joe Biden had won. It's like, I haven't heard any of this. I don't know where these people are getting it. And Joe is a wicked smart guy. I don't know where Joe is hearing this stuff. I got to find this. And then I got that last night and I went looking, and there are websites out there making pretty extraordinary claims that enough ballots have been shown to be fraudulent in Georgia that probably Donald Trump really did win the state. Now, I'm not going to get into the argument over whether or not Trump won or lost Georgia. This isn't the place for that. What I do want you to know is that the claims that are being circulated out there, they're not true. And I can tell you they're not true by the plaintiff in this case, the man who believes the race was stolen by that Donald Trump is a legitimate winner, actually saying that their images of the absentee ballots that they possess aren't clear enough to detect irregularities. If the images of the ballots aren't clear enough to detect irregularities, and the ballots have not actually been counted because there actually has not been an audit of those ballots, then you cannot say that Donald Trump truly won the state and the recount or the audit proves it, because there hasn't been an audit. They've gotten photocopies or digital images of absentee ballots. They've got digital images of absentee ballots. They concede that those digital images aren't clear enough to detect irregularities. Therefore, you can't say that the election in Georgia was stolen. You may think the election in Georgia was stolen. I'm not going to argue with you about it. What I am going to tell you is that someone somewhere on some website is circulating a story that the election in Georgia has been cast into doubt. There is proof that Donald Trump won it based on an audit. There's been no audit in Georgia. There has been no audit in Georgia. The number of people who call this program on a daily basis to ask me what I think about the ongoing audit in Georgia, I'm like, what the hell are you people reading? There's no audit in Georgia. Again, if you're just tuning in, a judge has dismissed most of a lawsuit seeking a deep inspection of Fulton County absentee ballots from last year's presidential election, a review pursued by voters trying to find fraud. The Superior Court judge ruled that based on sovereign immunity, the county cannot be sued, and he jeopardizes the prospects for that ballot inspection. The case wanted to scrutinize 147,000 absentee ballots. It's been perplexing to me for the last few weeks now to have people reach out to me and ask me what I think about the audit and the review and what they're finding. And I'm sitting here thinking, I didn't even know they were doing it. And I've tried multiple times to find out information. As you may remember, if you're a regular listener of the program, a few weeks ago, we had a guy call the program and ask me the status and what I thought and why was it so hush-hush. And I started reaching out, trying to find out. And I reached out to multiple lawyers. And they said, What's this guy talking about? There's nothing happening. And people kept assuring me, no, there's been an audit. So here apparently is the bottom line. Digital copies of absentee ballots were made. And people reviewing the absentee ballots are claiming some sort of fraud, or they're claiming they found a number of people who shouldn't have voted, who did vote. There are a number of irregularities that they found, and there are always irregularities because people are in charge of elections and people are stupid and people make mistakes. But there's never actually been an actual audit of the absentee ballots, and now the plaintiffs are conceding that the digital images are not good enough to do that. But there's something else here as well you need to understand. There has never been, nor will there ever be, a flawless election. A flawless election is an impossibility. It is sooner to imagine Jesus Christ showing up on the clouds tomorrow than to imagine a perfect election. The reason there will never, ever be a perfect election on planet Earth is because elections are presided over, conducted, and implemented by people. Not just any people, typically the elderly, who are in some cases somewhat hard of seeing, and in most cases technologically not proficient. And when it's not the elderly, it's stupid people. No offense. That's just true. People are stupid. So when you have a bunch of people presiding over an election, you're going to get mistakes. What the strategy has been from the conspiracy theorists is to nitpick mistakes and find 10, 15 mistakes. Say, look at all of these mistakes, 15 mistakes, and they're 15, they're going to be 11,000. There are always mistakes in an election. There are always errors. There's never a perfect election. The question is, are there enough? And you cannot say under the law, you found 30 mistakes. You found 30 screw-ups. You found 30 people who shouldn't have voted. You can't then say, well, there must be 11,000 more. You've got to find those 11,000. And they haven't. And so they're taking extrapolations and misstatements and, frankly, in some cases, flat out lies from various people to undermine the election. Whether the election it had integrity or not is beside the point. The fact is, there are a ton of people who think enough evidence has been shown to cast doubt on Georgia's election. And not only has there not been, but the case that was supposed to show it is now getting tossed. And a lot of people assumed there was an ongoing count of absentee ballots in Georgia that's never actually taken place.
Well connected and
1 minute.